to women's organizations, and only 18% have access to training and calamity insurance. Yet on top of these issues, the women in agriculture have to contend with farming technologies that are heavily dependent on chemical inputs. The promotion of high-yielding crop varieties have often been justified by the increasing food demand. However, the long-term effects may prove to be more disastrous to food security. Our increasing dependence on seed companies displaces the women's traditional roles in seed storage and engenders disdain for indigenous farming practices and knowledge. Reliance on chemical-based farm inputs is harmful to the environment by creating, obviously, more hazardous and poisonous substances that further contaminate land, water, air, and our health. Moreover, in the context of trade liberalization policies, agricultural production has largely become export-oriented and cash-oriented. Agribusiness plantations employ monocropping system of agriculture which easily depletes soil nutrients and threaten the biodiversity in our communities. With all the social and structural problems confronting women, adverse climate changes could only worsen their situation. With lesser resources available, as we have seen earlier, next slide please, women tend to allocate more time to their farm-based and home-based activities. This is what Ines was mentioning as time poverty. In our study, we have learned that women in agriculture spend 8 to 11 hours doing farm-based and home-based work. Droughts have adversely affected household food provisioning as well. It is now becoming more difficult for women to look for food, fuel, and water, which were previously quite available within the community. In remote areas, women and girls are forced to walk for hours to fetch water, making them more vulnerable to accidents and even incidences of violence against women. Disasters such as floods and landslides exacerbated women's lack of access to food and control over the quality of food and the conditions of its production. And again, with few rural women having lesser access to mechanisms such as training and calamity insurance, which could help them become more resilient and responsive to the impact of disasters. But there's good news. Just like the Tiduray women of the women of the Tiduray Lambangian tribe, rural women are beating again their gongs to renewed rhythms of hope. So what are the women doing? The women themselves are taking initiatives to address areas of vulnerabilities and are developing strategies for effective responses to disasters and to better adapt to adverse climate changes. Foremost, women are doing organizing work as part of capacity building through women's organizations, both at the community and at the national level. In the Philippines, we have organized the National Coalition of Rural Women. Women have also started to engage local governments in policy dialogues on issues of environment, food self-sufficiency, and sustainable agriculture. We have pushed for programs and local ordinances such as organic rice production. There are also campaigns for forest and watershed protection and the continuous pursuit or to secure the rights to ancestral domains. The Tiduray Lambangian Women's Organization I have mentioned earlier is actually spearheading activities that would secure ancestral domains from extractive industries such as mining and sustain environment-friendly indigenous farming systems. Lastly, women are promoting sustainable agricultural practices. Next slide, please. SUSAG practices, as we call them, help women secure control over the seeds and promote diversified farming, among others. One of the women's organizations in the country, Sarilaya, is organizing model eco-farms. Basically, SUSAG promotes practices that are ecologically sound, economically feasible, socially just and humane, culturally appropriate, and grounded on holistic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Mayet?
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Marita Rodriguez. As Calas mentioned, CERD is a non-government organization that is existing for 30 years now, and all those times we have been working with fisher folk, men and women. Okay, for start, next slide please. Let me show you again the Philippine map. The country is an archipelagic country composed of 7,100 islands. And I'm showing you this to emphasize that the country is bounded by 3 large bodies of water. On the northwest by South China Sea, on the east by the Pacific Ocean, and on the south by Celebes Sea. So, by that alone, it shows that fishing is an important source of livelihood in the country. Next slide, please. Now, the women. In the country, when we say fishers, people usually think of men. In fact, the Tagalog word for fishers, which is mangingisda, when translated into English, it's fishermen. But studies done by CERD show that women are actually doing as much as 50 to 90% of fishing activities from pre to post-harvest. Pre-harvest, meaning before catching the fish, it is the women who prepare the fish baits, or mend the nets, or prepare food, which the fisherman will be bringing to the sea while catching fish. And then it is also the women who are involved in the post-harvest phase of fishing. They are the ones sorting the fish, or selling them, or processing them, meaning salting or drying. So if we can see, women are really the ones who convert the fish into cash. And sometimes even, there are women who join their husband in the actual harvesting of fish, meaning together with the husband, they go to the sea. Now, aside from the women's involvement in fishing, they also earn income by gathering shells and other marine products in mangrove areas, in seagrass beds, in reef flat areas. Next slide. Now, what are the challenges faced by women fishers? The fish catch is already declining. This is because of illegal and destructive fishing and intrusion of commercial fishers in municipal waters. Because you see, in the Philippines, commercial fishing vessels, which weigh 3 gross tons or more, are supposed to fish only beyond the 15-kilometer limit from the shore. But in reality, they do fish inside the municipal fishing ground. So this causes decline in fish stocks. Also, the other marine resources like the mangroves are being degraded because of illegal cutting and conversion into fish ponds. So what happens? It is the women who have the burden of finding additional sources of income. But in their communities, it is the mangroves and the seagrass which are the nearest source of income. But with these resources getting degraded, so they have to find income elsewhere. Sometimes they get themselves employed as household help in more affluent families, but the affluent families are usually not within the coastal community, so they get separated from their families. So this resource degradation actually leads to economic displacement of the women. Next slide, please. Now, about climate change in the coastal communities. The impacts of climate change, as they are enumerated there, are already being felt by the coastal community.